Marcos Dictatorship. Ferdinand Marcos Dictatorship, the greatest dominance of state over the society the Philippines has seen, endured until 1986. Heyday. The declaration of martial law devastated Marcos' opponents. Politicians were jailed, and students, academics, journalists, businessmen, and labor and peasant organizers had also been arrested, and many who had escaped went underground with the CPP or the Communist Party of the Philippines. This strained the limited resources and organizational capacity of the party. After almost 3 years of political conflict, martial law was to many a welcome respite. Popular acquiescence, a unified military, and American consent enabled Marcos to consolidate swiftly. In January 1973, Marcos staged national referendum to approve the new constitution, in designating the president symbolic head of state and the prime minister head of the government. The new constitution discarded a government balance powers for a parliamentary system. A literacy requirement no longer restricted suffrage, but the constitution required every citizen qualified to vote to register and cast his vote. A transitory provision also allowed Marcos a term extension as president. He packed the Supreme Court, making all subsequent executive decrees and orders laws of the land, thereby arrogating legislative power to himself. Marcos became both the president and a prime minister and allowed him to exercise legislative powers until martial law have been lifted. With these new powers, Marcos moved easily from the original idea of martial law as an emerging response to crisis to martial law as an instrument for creating a new society. The AFP detained Marcos' political enemies, took over regional and local political networks on his behalf. It began a brutal engagement in the southern Philippines with the Moro National Liberation Front and launched major attacks against CPP and NPA. Marcos expanded the AFP's power by integrating municipal police forces and the Philippine Constabulary into the AFP hierarchy, and he gave it a bigger role in governance by assigning officers to run hitherto civilian agencies. AFP's national budget rose from 880 million to 4 billion pesos. Technocrats who believed in the fundamental restructuring of governance were given a free hand and expanding executive power. The budget process was also linked closely to economic planning through two new super agencies: the Planning, Programming, Budgeting System, and the Development Budget Coordinating Committee. Presidential Decree No. 2 declared the entire country subject to land reform and the peasantry henceforth free from bondage. Presidential Decree No. 27 announced the start of Operation Land Transfer on tenant-occupied holdings of more than 7 hectares on rice and corn lands. Under the Rice Self-Sufficiency Program Masaganas 99, 634,000 farmers borrowed $87 million from 400 rural banks, 102 branches of the Philippine National Bank, and 25 offices of the Agricultural Credit Administration. By the mid-1970s, state corporations and their associated bureaucracies had established a dominant presence in oil production, power, mass transportation, fertilizer production, and new investment. Government finance institutions and the Philippine National Bank and the Development Bank of the Philippines became new sources of credit to complement the central bank. American military assistance soared from $18.5 million in 1972 to $45.3 million the following year. U.S. President Jimmy Carter's human rights inflected foreign policy did not preclude Marcos from receiving $500 million in security assistance. Marcos required the electoral politics. He replaced the empty shell of a two-party system with a single pro-government party, the Kilusang Bagong Lipunan. The KBL brought together his national and local allies with former members of opposition who chose to join him rather than retire. Marcos held a series of referenda plebiscites to demonstrate popular support for his new society. In 1978, he even held demonstration elections at the local and legislative levels, allowing small opposition parties outside Manila to win certain city and provincial positions and a tiny number of seats in the National Assembly. The KBL Manila slate won, led by Imelda Marcos. The Green Revolution produced unprecedented harvests, and land reform largely redistributed the country's right and corn land to tenants. This period also saw the expansion of the service and commercial sectors and the provision of some affordable urban housing through the New Society Sites and Services program. In terms of lasting economic benefits, the results were disappointing. Land reform inadvertently promoted class differentiation within the peasantry. Consolidation of ownership by wealthier peasants was accomplished despite the prohibition on buying and selling certificates of land transfer. As Boyce observes, the technocrats who formulated Philippine development strategy under President Marcos did not challenge the country's inegalitarian economic and political order. Another highly visible aspect of the Marcos development plan was publicly funded construction. Much of the expenditure went to showcase projects initiated by Imelda Marcos to highlight the achievements of the new society. By 1983, total debt was about $25 billion, and the Philippines was one of the 10 most indebted countries in the developing world.